In your general term they use a lot in Zen is intimate, becoming intimate with your direct experience. That's really what it's about, right? Kind of slowly falling awake is a phrase that one of my friends
Falling
uses.
awake. Hello and welcome to Center for Victory's podcast of Your Best Day Yet. At Center for Victory, we're here to help unlock, reinforce, and enrich relationships through personal and professional development. I'm Eric Guy, Chief Victory Officer at the Center for Victory. With me today, very special guest. Haven't known him long, but he's been on some of our treks with us as we go out hiking. But Mr. Jackson Kerchis, did I say that right?
You did.
I did. How
Good
about
work.
that? So, former ops manager. He's going to get into it, guys. But in his being as young as he is, he's really had a lot of experience. So, ops manager. We're going to get into the fact of how he spent some time as a Zen monk, as well, which is pretty cool. But I think what brought the two of us together. One was a great mentor of mine. That said we needed to meet each other, and anytime he tells me that, it must be important, so I took his advice with that. But Jackson also owns a company, and we're going to unpack that today, Jackson, where he helps military and business leaders improve their well-being and performance. So welcome, my friend.
Thank you. I've been looking forward to this for quite some time, so...
All right, man. Well, let's get into it. I obviously did the short bio. Give us the long bio. Like, what brought you here? You've done studies on happiness. So clue us into all those things too, please.
Sure. I think it's really maybe best illustrated with a story.
Sure.
I was driving home one day in my brand new first luxury car, right? 2003 Mazda Miata I bought on Facebook for $3,000 from a gentleman in Alabama. And I whipped into the side street by my house. And so just as I'm kind of pulling in there, this guy is walking his dog, right? So he kind of jumps back. I slam on the brakes. We lock eyes in that sort of mutually pissed off, frustrated sort of way that I'm sure you've never done that. But, he starts mouthing. I start mouthing something back. Next thing you know, I threw open my door and started out after him. And just as he turned around, I paused for a second. And I said, hey, that was my bad. And he didn't expect that at that point. So I said, yeah, I came in here too fast. I could have hit you, whatever. And as I got back into my car, I thought, well, what just happened, right? What was that? And I realized that was sort of my training wearing away at me, that was my habits, my study, my practice. You see, about 4 years before that, I had made a commitment to do a daily meditation, mindfulness practice, right? Which is really just be where your feet are, okay? And so you do that, you try to pay attention, your mind wanders off, you bring it back. And you're kind of training that psychological muscle. And I didn't necessarily realize it, but it had totally transformed how I show up in my day-to-day life. And so that is a microcosm for kind of everything I kind of teach and think about with happiness, right? Is that just like you train the physical body, if you can study the sort of mental and psychological and relational causes and conditions of happiness, and then you put them into practice, right, you will learn to be happier. Mm-hmm. And so having had that insight, it inspired me to do a lot of what I do, and I'm happy to go more in depth, but the cliff notes are running a fintech startup at the University of Alabama. No idea what we're doing, but we were going to say, we're going to solve the student debt sentence, okay? Crazy idea, no entrepreneurs ever had before. We said, we're going to build an app. And that was the extent of our business plan. And so we raised about $150,000 from private investors and the government, Small Business Administration. They thought that would be a good use of money. And I sometimes joke that our first year, we had an ROI of 0%. And the second year, we doubled that. And so after doing that for some time, I said, okay, this whole business thing isn't for me right now. I had my sights set on something else because I sort of had an existential crisis around that time of, well, what should I do with my life? And why do I want the things I want? Why do I want to do the things I want to do? And thought, well, it's to be happy. Right? So being, I think, a very lazy college kid, I said, well, if I could just skip over all that stuff of being a CEO and running a startup and just study happiness, because I'm kind of a nerd. So that's what I did. I created the world's first major in happiness studies, interdisciplinary bachelor's degree. I taught the first course on happiness at the University of Alabama, won a research grant, kind of very quickly said, this is life's most important subject. I'm not going to waste my time with other stuff. Okay, so I do that. You're thinking, well, what does a happiness major do? Do you get a job? I went and lived as a Zen monk for 4 months, continuing my fascination with these different sort of models of mental training. After that, I sort of unretired, right? You people think you go from working to a monastery. I went from a monastery to work. I worked in a very competitive, kind of high octane business environment, private company called McMaster Carr, but they're basically the biggest company you've never heard of, right? Family shop, probably do, I don't know how many billions of dollars, but similar to like Amazon for industrial supply. But I came back to that kind of inkling I still had for business and leadership. I said, I know I want to do this happiness stuff, but how can I make a living doing it? And I said, well, if I can like bring this to businesses and organizations and help them improve their employee well-being, but also how that drives performance, maybe I'll be onto something. Mm-hmm. And so I started speaking, working with some companies, coaching, and then I'm sure maybe we'll touch on some of those later, but our main client for the last 2 or 3 years has been the Army National Guard in Wisconsin, helping them get after recruiting, retention, mental health, right? It's kind of soldier well-being. So that's it.
Yeah. And so, like, guys, you could see where, we cross paths quite a bit. I mean, when I was in college, I had that. I didn't study happiness. Well, I did, maybe not just to the extent that you have, but that's what I wanted to do. I just wanted to stop being miserable, and I just didn't know how to do that. So it's very interesting that you're bringing this to us today, especially with all of this. But I'm sure you slipped it in there just a little bit, and we might as well tackle it right out of the gate because people are already wondering. Because I lived as a Zen monk, and you just kind of went over it real quick. What led you there, and what was that experience like for you? What did you gain?
Yeah, well, the thing that led me there was really, it was sort of like, Steve Jobs says, you can't connect the dots looking forward, you can only connect them looking back. I watched a TED Talk, which I will recommend, Matthew Ricard, The Habits of Happiness. And he kind of, I think, seeded that idea for me at a very young age of like the way we think about happiness in our culture, which tends to be very achievement oriented. And once I just get there, I'll be happy. Right? I sometimes joke that we all do happiness procrastination. Yeah, I got a really busy week, but then things will settle down. Or once I get through this project, right? But this year is going to be crazy. And it's like, and then never comes. Right? I still do this. He said, well, they've started studying the brains of meditators, these monks, and it's like their brains are totally different. And he says it's like an Olympic athlete, right? They spend tens of thousands of hours training their body, you get different results. You spend tens of thousands of hours training your mind, you get different results. And so that was kind of the seeded in that story I said at the beginning. I started practicing daily meditation, and I think the simplest way to put it maybe is that it just made me less of an idiot. Which, that hasn't fully taken effect, but, that kind of thing, I knew it was transformative. So I said, okay, I really want to go right to the source, right? Yeah. And go all in, immerse myself in this practice for some period of time. And so that's what I did. I applied to be a guest student. And for those of you watching, if you're curious, you have retreat centers all over the country. They don't have to be Buddhist. Some are, some aren't. But just about all of them, you can just go and be a guest student. Say, maybe I'll give you a little donation, or I'll work while I'm there, and so you'll give me room and board. I have to follow your rules, whatever. And it's a good way to get that immersive practice.
Well, where did you go?
I went to San Francisco Zen Center, Green Gulch Temple.
Okay.
So they have a city one and then one out in the mountains. And that's actually, oh gosh, I could go down another rabbit hole here. I'll spare you. But really interesting when you look at from there, literally a direct line back to Buddha. Okay, and so the brief, because I'm kind of a nerd, So Buddha becomes enlightened, blah, 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 right? Sort of that teaching. Bodhidharma walks from India to China. So he brings Chan, it was called, Buddhism, to China. He was kind of a hardcore guy. They said he ripped his eyelids out so that he could sit in meditation and not fall asleep. So, you know,
Okay, I didn't hear that one.
yeah. So anyway, he brings it to China. Okay, Dogen Zenji takes a boat from China back to Japan. It gets there for a few hundred years. A guy named Suzuki Roshi goes across the Pacific in 1960 and brings kind of Zen Buddhism to the West. Philip Kapleau, some other people kind of start this movement. A guy named John Kabat-Zinn, who you might know, goes to a talk at MIT. He's the one who has made what we now know as mindfulness, right? Which is kind of the clinical secular application of meditation. Anyway, it all flowed through that San Francisco Zen Center. So give them some credit. So I did that. And to answer your second question, what was it like? Boring is the main adjective. Like people think, oh, you lived as a Zen monk, you must have done all this. And it's like, well, 4:15 wake up bell. You go to the monastery, or the Zendo, which is like the meditation hall. You just sit and stare at a wall and you try to be aware.
You don't thumb through your social media?
No, check your social media, no music, no TV. Well, yeah, that actually is a fair amount of music, if you could call it that, of bells and drums and things. Do that for a couple hours, breakfast, morning cleaning, do like kind of a work day from 8 to, let's say, 2 or 3. Then in the evening, more meditation. And then you have every so often these longer periods of sitting or meditation. And, really, I have a few nuggets I could give if you want in terms of like wisdom I picked up there. But the main thing is it's almost less of like insight or understanding, I would say, and more just like polishing a mirror, right? You can think about your consciousness being that mirror, which sounds a little out there, but more so just you're refining your attention or your awareness, right? And so almost like if you said, hey, I'm training for a marathon, I was like, well, what'd you learn? It's like, well, I might have learned a few things, but it's really more an embodied change. Say it's like that for your awareness, right? That your colors may be more vivid, sounds may be more vivid, tastes may be more vivid. And your general term they use a lot in Zen is intimate, becoming intimate with your direct experience. That's really what it's about, right? Kind of slowly falling awake is a phrase that one of my friends uses.
Awake. Yeah, I mean, so you did it for 4 months. Was that a planned 4 months, or was it just like you got the 4 months and be like, yeah, I've had enough, or?
Yeah, no. So this is, and I'll give you another. So this, for any of you younger listeners, okay, best advice I can give. My philosophy was I want to put off being an adult as long as possible. Okay, I want to put off, being in the real world. So I got my offer from that company I mentioned. And you can imagine being on the other side of this HR phone call. Hey, I got the offer. I'm going to accept, but, I think I'm going to go live as a monk, and I'd like to just delay my start date as long as possible. As long as possible. You got your whole life to work and, have a job. And so anyway, they said, all right, well, we can push it back 6 months or something. And so I said, all right, I'm going to do this. They have like these practice periods, which are kind of these set intervals. So I knew it was going to be a few month visit.
That's pretty neat, man. So you brought that back. When did you do the study on, like, as you were studying happiness? What are the big things that you teach people about that and its importance?
Yeah, well,
especially around mental health.
Yeah, well, the importance. I'll maybe seed this, and we can go in depth on it later if you want. There are a lot of surprising business and performance implications for happiness. The study that comes to mind is actually a meta-study, right, which is a study of studies. The frequent benefits of positive affect. Does happiness lead to success? By Lyuber, Mirsky, and Diener. Okay, maybe if you're kind of nerdy like me, read the paper. If not, it basically just shows how positive emotion, right, when you think of as happiness, leads to all these downstream effects like better relationships, better health, better creativity, better problem solving. You can even look at other examples of where kind of happier companies outperform in terms of stocks, which we can, but to kind of, that's maybe the why, okay? It's like, I think happiness is a kind of a goal in and of itself, right? We don't want to be miserable, but sometimes it's nice to remember the practical applications, right? You know, it'll help me be healthier and make more money or whatever. As far as approaches to happiness, I actually say don't really worry about happiness. Like, happiness is a waste of time. Okay? And people are like, well, I thought you were the happiness guy. What do you mean? And it's like, no, like, don't focus on happiness. Focus on the ingredients for happiness, right? Because it has to come from somewhere, right? And so I say the ingredients, the simplest way to break it down is biology, psychology, and relationships.
Yeah.
If you have healthy biology, okay, so things like exercise, sleep, nutrition, you have positive psychology, so your thoughts and emotions are largely positive. And then you have strong, loving relationships. You can't help but be happy, right? So there's so many ways you get complicated and philosophical, and it's like, no, just every single day, invest in biology, psychology, relationships, right? Checklist. Every day, some sort of vote you're casting. And then remember what I said at the beginning, study and practice. You understand what makes for strong biology, psychology, relationships, and you build practices in each one. Like I said, you didn't even have to worry about happiness. Okay? It all just takes care of itself.
Hi, everyone. I wanted to tell you about an event we have coming up on January 18th from 9 to 3 at Concord Church, and that is our 3rd annual Vision Day. Now, I know everyone likes to set goals at the beginning of the year, but this is our intentional way of doing that to help you define and align with your priorities and expectations at work, at school, at home, etc. We're going to be working on personal alignment, practical teaching, and purposeful direction. And you can sign up now for this event at centerforvictory.com under the events tab. And spots are limited. So if you are a teenager and above, you are more than welcome to come. We actually would really love to see you there. But make sure you get your spot now by signing up. Don't miss out. We'd love to have you there. Let's make 2025 the best year yet. And now back to your regularly scheduled podcast.
Right. So, I'm curious to get your thoughts on this. It's like the happier that I got and have become, and I'm not saying every day's easy by any means, but I feel like things get easier the happier I am. Is there any science that backs that up?
Yeah, I think that meta study I mentioned at the beginning, so it says exactly that. So I can probably off the cuff here think of a few examples. Okay, let's think maybe sales, okay? 1990s, I think. MetLife Insurance is hiring 5,000 salespeople per year, $75 million annual training budget. I think they had about 50% attrition in the first year, 80% attrition in 2 years, okay? Not great. I think you could probably do better than that with a $100 million training budget, right, Eric?
You would think. You would hope.
So Dr. Marty Seligman, who's a positive psychology guy, comes in, does some assessments around optimism, and found that kind of happiness in that sense, your outlook on life, was predictive of sales retention and sales performance. Something to the tune of, I think, after 2 years, people who passed the optimism assessment outsold by about 31% compared to those who didn't. And the funniest part of that study is he hired these kind of super happy people that failed the skills assessment and did really, really well on the happiness optimism assessment. So you can imagine some of these people, right? Yeah. They're just like, hey, I have no idea what I'm doing, but this is going to be great. They outsold by over 50% over 2 years. Okay, so that's one. Problem solving. Okay, they have physicians come into the lab and they like emotionally kind of prime them or manipulate them to be either more happy or more kind of neutral. Mm-hmm. Then they put them through a case where they have a made-up patient. Here are the symptoms. Here's whatever. Panel of experts reviews how effectively they solve the case. I think the ones in a good mood solved it in about half the time with far greater, what they called like cognitive clarity, right? So fewer mistakes, whatever. And that's the panel of experts is saying that. You think about an organization, two ones that I think are interesting stories. The Parnassus Fund and Happy, HAPI is the ticker. again, two funds that have they do it in their own way. They talk about human capital factors. They don't always use the language of happiness, but they invest in these kind of more positive companies with a better employee experience, and they have both done really well. I think both have outperformed the market. And so, yeah, I would say problem solving, creativity, your just kind of health and energy, your sales skills, right? When you're in, and it's like kind of intuitive, right? Like if you ever have one of those days where you just feel like a miserable sad sack, right? That's probably not the day you're going to get up and run the marathon and sell the thing. So there's a scientific element and an intuitive element to what you say.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Yeah, let's shift gears a little bit. What kinds of things are you doing for our military? Because it's like, well, I work with the National Guard and we talk about happiness all day. I mean, do you get these folks around the campfire and sing Kumbaya? Or I know you don't do that, but I'm just. But I am interested in what you actually are doing with that, because we've briefly covered it. So Jackson has been out on a hike or two with us because he's a Pittsburgh guy. He actually doesn't live too far from me, which is a little different. Most people live down towards the city. But what are you doing with our military?
Yeah. So
can you share it?
Yeah, I can share. Yes. You may see some black helicopters flying over the top of your house after, but. And no, to your point, that's actually one of my favorite parts is converting the skeptics, right? Because we'll train like infantry battalions. And we actually had on our last battalion a guy at the very end, kind of come up to us real kind of like their CSM, right? So very kind of old school. He's like, he coined us, right? Which is give these little coins.
Yeah.
And it's like, we kind of thought this would be some woke BS, but this was pretty good. And so kind of I would say the thesis of it, if you don't mind me continuing to be a little nerdy with my studies.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so 2021, Happy Soldiers Are Highest Performers by Paul Lester, Seligman, and some other researchers. Published it was through the University of Pennsylvania, I think. They looked at 908,000 or something, so almost 1 million Army soldiers. And they found that those who were happier at time one, as measured by your emotional tendency and your optimism, were more likely to win awards for performance and for courage or for bravery.
Wow.
Incredible. And if you look at the bottom percentile versus the top, I think it was a 4x difference in likelihood. So we say, all right, that's pretty powerful. We talk about being ready to fight and win our nation's wars. Well, if we have soldiers who are winning awards for performance and bravery, okay, that's pretty good.
Yeah.
So I would say the kind of thread that brings it all together is, I guess, kudos to the Department of Defense. They already look at something called the DOCS, which is the Defense Organizational Climate Survey. And their concept they talk about is command climate, which is kind of like we think of culture. It's a little different, but we said, okay, when you already know the importance of command climate, and we know that study, our sort of thesis is, hey, we want to develop your leaders to create a command climate supportive of happiness and high performance. And of course, that's going to be kind of a non-pathological way and a systemic way to also do some kind of preventive work around mental illness and suicide and even some maybe retention type things. And so I'd say the core things we focus on, we probably give them honestly too much information in 3 days, but we really talk a lot about what are those pillars of a positive high performance command climate. Things like cohesion. How do you connect with people, build trust, psychological safety, bring them together? Emotionally intelligent leadership, which in the private sector is probably 50% of companies have at least heard of that. In the military, it's probably a little bit less common. And even work-life balance is a big one for them, trying to give them some tools for that. And so it really all goes back to saying, hey, how can we focus on this battalion-level leadership? You guys creating a climate where people are going to be at their best, and then our hope is that kind of downstream, we're going to get improved retention, recruiting, mental health outcomes. And I can say we were under something called Comprehensive Health and Wellness, CHW, Chief Hunnell, kudos, shout out Chief Hunnell, as well as the two-star general who hired us. They had a bunch of these we were kind of under an umbrella of these internal initiatives, but all around, I would say, that command climate, new wave leadership, and some of the impacts we've seen in Wisconsin. 2023, 0 suicides, for example, after multiple every year for a decade. 2024, that trend's continued. There's maybe been 1. Recruiting and retention, the battalion that was sort of our gold star group that really went above and beyond, and even after working with us, revamped their strategy and whatnot, they saw a 34% turnaround in recruiting production. They met their state missions in every category for the first time in, I think, 6 years. And so that just speaks again to the power of when you get that kind of climate and the psychological dimension right, how it can impact, of course, well-being, but ultimately, like in the case of that recruiting or retention team, your performance and productivity.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. Implications for business. If you could give us, and I know you have a lot on this, so I'm asking you to kind of be brief. If somebody would hear this and say, hey, this is really interesting, what's 1 or 2 things I should be doing in my business to move the needle a little bit? What would you tell them?
Yep. I'll give you a real simple mental model I often use. I call it the 4S model, the 4S model of organizational change. That stands for skills, systems, psychological safety. Okay, for those of you at home, I know psychology starts with a P. Okay, the psychology is in parentheses, and safety is the S there. Thank you. And then shared commitment. Okay. So skills and systems, I won't touch on too much. Those are kind of obvious, but it's often overlooked, right? People need to know how to do what's being asked of them and then have that reinforced with systems.
Absolutely.
Okay, so that's that. If you don't have that, you probably don't have a business. But the other 2 are more the psychological dimension. So psychological safety would be you have a climate or an environment where people feel like they can speak up, voice a concern, ask a question. And a lot of organizations don't have that, right? If you ever have that place where it's kind of like, well, we just kind of keep our heads down and because it's the way we've always done things, that is indicative of an unhealthy organization, right? Because you need that environment of trust and support to really have innovation. And so a few things you can do right there if you want to create that is just literally get to know people on kind of a personal level, create shared experiences to build trust, right? Communicate in an emotionally intelligent way where you're going to build that cohesion and really try to framework like a learning experience by asking questions, admitting you make mistakes. Like you can imagine as a leader, the type of input you're going to get if you start a meeting saying like, all right, here's our Q1 strategy. We're going to get after it, guys. You know the drill. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to do A, B, and C. Versus if you say, hey, guys, I don't really have all the answers here. I think what we want to do for Q1 is A, B, and C. But like, what do you think? Maybe we'll go around the room. Eric, what's your input first? Okay, that's subtle. And you don't need to do it all the time, but it's powerful. So that would be that psychological safety bucket. And then shared commitment is trying to like really make people feel valued and make people kind of connect to the why they're doing the work, right? I think about a study from McKinsey that I found interesting is they looked at kind of the disconnects between what employers think is important and employees think is important. And one of the top things that employers underestimate were valued by manager, valued by organization, feeling like trust and care. And so think about how can you build sort of that personal commitment to the organization, right? Recognize the contributions people make them feel valued, explain even just why they're doing it. Again, I'll avoid that rabbit hole, but the context of why and who it's impacting, right? If people feel like what they're doing makes sense, they understand the personal benefit to them, the business, and the benefit to others, they're going to have that sense of self-efficacy, which is where buy-in comes from, and they're going to be happier. So hopefully that wasn't too long-winded.
No, that was a good answer. I appreciate that. Before our last question, where can people find you at?
Yeah, two main avenues. If you're interested in some of the maybe more personal applications, books, courses, whatever, you go to happinessphd.com. I'm building out my own kind of personal happiness PhD project, which will result in a textbook, courses, etc. And then on the organizational side, Happiness Means Business. That's where we got coaching, consulting, speaking, all that stuff.
Good. Check it out, guys. I think he's doing some great work here, and we'll continue to do it. But so Jackson, last question that we give all their guests because it's called Your Best Day Yet. What do you think to date? How do you define your best day?
I mean, my best day, there's a Zen koan, right, that says, sort of the capping line is every day is a good day. And I sort of, I don't know that I totally believe that because I'm a human, but generally, like, I am an extraordinarily boring person and I love that. So my ideal best day is probably I get up like every morning. It's like there's no negotiating. I'm like, oh, I wonder if I'm gonna meditate today or do my habits today. Or it's like, no, you just do the thing. Right. So I get up at maybe 6:30. Do my morning walk outside, sit, do my meditation, my sort of mental training, I eat the same breakfast every day, 5 or 6 eggs with spinach. I go work for 3 or 4 hours of deep work, reading, writing, videos, coach people, whatever. Eat lunch, after about noon, my brain likes to shut off, so I do whatever, get a long workout in, visit with some of my friends, and yeah, that's it. I don't need to, climb a tower, run a marathon. No, just boring. It's good.
Good stuff. All right. Well, yeah, there's always different answers there. Good stuff. I really appreciate you coming on. Hopefully we can have you back because there's a lot. I mean, we could have unpacked probably about every question that I asked you. So hopefully we can have you back. But man, if you didn't get anything out of this, guys, maybe watch a different channel. But thanks again, Jackson. Really appreciate it. You can find more information from us at centerforvictory.com. Like, share, do all that good stuff. And just remember, wherever you're at, whatever you're doing, make this your best day yet. See you soon.